Hey, everybody. We're so glad you're back. Dr. Scott Resnick and I will be spilling the tea on hormones and perimenopause. Scott, it's so good to see you again. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me and help answer some of these questions that we've been getting.
Yeah, you know that you and I just love talking to each other, and
We do.
it's almost as if we need to put like a little governor on this, so that
Yeah.
we're not doing this an hour and a half later, so prattling on about things. But
No.
as my mission in life is to help you and others really become best educated in what's going on with their bodies, because there are so many opportunities to really get ourselves healthy, where my sadly mainstream medicine has failed us. And we didn't get a chance to talk about this, but I think you and I would both agree that you have a heart attack, you break your femur, rupture your appendix. Yes, modern medicine is
Yeah.
fantastic. It's amazing. Use it. Don't question it. It's
Right.
really there for you. But there are so many other aspects of life and living with where people don't feel well, or they want to achieve a different state of health. And as we know, modern or mainstream medicine lacks the investigations, the
Yeah.
curiosity, and in many ways the tools to reverse some of these things. So what are we talking about today?
Oh,
Talking about hormones.
yeah, we're talking about hormones. And in preparing for this, we were saying, I had said to you, people are always asking, hormone replacement therapy, what is it? Is it harmful? Is it going to help me? How do I know what I need to do? And you said,
Right.
whoa, back up a little bit.
That's
Let's
right.
talk about what is a hormone and what does
Okay,
it do, right? And then also, then we can talk about what systems it affects, right? Is that the classes you
perfect.
said, the classes of hormones, and then we can talk about hormone replacement therapy. So let's go that direction. I love it. And thank you for putting that in order because
Yeah,
we do need
absolutely.
to get a base for our knowledge so that we can help
Right.
ourselves better.
So what I'm trying to dispel with is that I need to go to my naturopath to get my hormones fixed. It's okay, we're just going to go and fix every hormone. There are a lot of different hormones in the
Yeah.
body, and they have a lot of different applications. And I think what we said is that it's almost as if we look at these different spectrums across which hormones work, that it's almost like a tabletop, right? And if you want to have a nice balanced table, but it might be easy for one of those systems to be out of whack. So your tabletop is going to be askance,
Yeah.
it's going to be all
Yep.
kilter. And the secret is to take a step or two back to say, okay, let's get down to some fundamentals. So
Yep.
what's a hormone? All right.
Yeah. What is it?
So a hormone is basically it's a chemical which is secreted by a gland or a tissue or a cell that carries a message to a different gland or tissue or cell somewhere else in the body.
Okay.
So that's what
Okay.
all hormones do by definition. We're familiar with insulin, life-saving hormone, right? It's made in the pancreas, but it travels to each of our 10 trillion cells and tells those cells how to uptake glucose, right? You've got the thyroid hormone, which is made in our thyroid gland here in our neck,
Okay.
and it travels to all of those 10 trillion cells in our body and tells them how to set their metabolism.
Mhm.
So a hormone can be a molecule like a steroid hormone, and these are the things like DHEA and cortisol and testosterone and estrogen. These have a molecular structure which is built off of cholesterol.
Okay.
Okay, and these hormones are made in different tissues, different glands, and go to different places in the body, and they transmit information. A hormone can also be a small protein. We talked
Oh.
about insulin, okay, that's known as a polypeptide. So
Mhm.
it's a protein which goes to different cells and relays the information, okay? It can also be just a molecule. So there are hormones like epinephrine and norepinephrine that are really just based on amino acids. These are modified, what is it? It's a tyrosine amino acid to help to make. So hormones have different shapes, they've got different structures,
Hmm.
but they're made from for one cell in the body or tissue or gland to communicate with another cell or tissue or gland. And what hormones do, which is important, is that they oftentimes with a chaperone or in
Mhm.
concert with other molecules move to the nucleus of the cell and instruct the cell of how to read its DNA. So this is what a hormone is doing. So remember, we've got all these different cells in our body. In every cell, we have the exact same DNA. But why is it that the kidney seems to do what kidney cells need
Yeah.
to know how to
Yeah.
do, and our
Very
liver cells do
specific.
what liver cells do,
Mhm.
and those are different from like our muscles. Okay,
Yeah.
so all of these different tissues and cell types have different receptor complexes whereby a hormone, whether it's a cholesterol-like molecule, a polypeptide, a neurotransmitter-like molecule, engage with the cell. This complex is then brought into the nucleus, and probably because of almost like a Lego block, like fits here, it doesn't fit here, matches onto the DNA and tells that cell what needs to be done in that cell's environment at that time. So these are dynamic ways of communicating. So our hormone activity is very rarely static in the human body. And that's a very fundamental thing that we need to think about as we talk about women going into the perimenopause and this sort of this continuum and transition of symptoms and changes and findings that go on over time. Because if you look at something even simple like the hormones that are being produced by women's ovaries, right? There's that gland. It's making hormones. Its primary hormones are the steroid-based hormones like progesterone and testosterone. When you graph it, it looks like this. That's, of course, that was a very crude representation of a woman's menstrual cycle. Could be very choreographed, and if sometimes you want to, we can actually discuss that.
Of course.
But so that's what a hormone does. Okay, so it's a molecule that allows one type of cell to communicate its needs or the environmental changes that are taking place so that another tissue or cell or organ can then respond with something that is all ideally situated to maintain the human in a state of health. There's nothing that goes on in our biology that is intended to hurt us, okay, with one caveat, okay? And that caveat would be this inflammatory process. So let's just say you get a cut on your skin, okay? We've all had it happen. It gets red, it gets inflamed, maybe it gets a little pussy, the skin starts getting a little red. What's happening is that our body is mounting an immune response. And the way that it fights the bacteria is with a huge inflammatory influx. And to use some of the military parlance, it's willing to accept a little bit of friendly fire. So in other words, hey, if we're going to eradicate this bacteria that could ultimately kill us, we're willing to cause a little bit of change in the hair pattern on the skin, leave a scar, cause some pain and redness. So we are willing to incur some damage to some tissues to keep us alive. But far and beyond, our body's intent is to say, what can we do to balance these hormones to give us our greatest opportunity to stay alive, be vibrant, feel good, think clearly, be able to feed ourselves, move around. And just a quick aside, I know we're talking about hormones, but in my opinion, the foundations of what it is to live well and to age well is to be able to see, think, to speak, to move around, and to probably have a nice healthy poop every day. If you can do that up into your mid 80s, you're doing great. You can move, you can think, you can communicate, you can get rid of your toxins. That's healthy living.
It's really interesting because I know those things about hormones. I know that, but hearing you the way that you say it, and then thinking about unbalanced hormones, now it makes sense as to why it is such a big deal, because the communication from the hormone to the other parts of the body, and also why if your adrenals aren't working, and then that's probably why your thyroid affects how your thyroid is working and other things. That's really cool for me to be able to light bulb and go, oh, I get that now. Like, I mean, I knew it affected it, but I didn't understand it. And then the other thing was you said about chaperoning. It was, and I thought that's because they work together. And that is why when hormones are unbalanced, it requires a deeper dive, right? More questions. And that's why functional medicine is such a good fit.
Yeah, so it gets super complex. So let's do that since we're just talking about the most basic biology. And I know that you when we talked about what we discussed, you're like, Scott, just talk about hormones. And it's like, okay, if we're going to talk about we're going to talk about hormones, but let's take a few steps back, because I think that as people have a better understanding of what a hormone does. Okay, so let's take something like estrogen. Okay, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about estrogen, as this is a hormone which is present in males and females, and both sexes want to have the right amount of estrogen in the body, right? So what estrogen does is it binds to something known as an estrogen receptor. And this is a protein that lives in the membrane of the cells that are more estrogen sensitive tissues. So these are the cells that need to get the message from estrogen. What happens is the estrogen receptor, estrogen molecule binds into this receptor. And what happens is there are conformational changes within this receptor. And then this receptor with the estrogen is then translated or carried into the nucleus of the cell, where it interacts with the DNA and tells that cell, how the DNA needs to start changing the proteins that DNA makes to make that cell's life better, basically. So that's one of the important things about hormones is they act at the nuclear level to instruct cells how to make changes. And what I want to say is that not all messages, as we're saying, okay, are spoken in the same tone of voice. All right. So there are some hormones that speak more loudly than others. And an example is something like epinephrine and norepinephrine. These are collectively known as adrenaline. Okay. Now, to be clear, these are neurotransmitters, right? But they're also hormones. So epinephrine and norepinephrine made by the adrenal glands, they wear a few hats. But I can tell you that when your epinephrine and norepinephrine is called into play, it's like you're shot out of a cannon, right? So they have a very loud voice. Get the hell out, fight or flight, raise our blood sugar, raise our hackles, get ready to go. Now, cortisol, on the other hand, similarly guides a lot of these same cellular pathways of defense and survival and stuff like that. But it speaks in a much more patient and much more kind of whispered voice. So what I want to, as we're talking about hormones, is remember that different hormones at different times in a person's life can actually almost have a different message that they pass on to the cells. So part of the secret, and this is not intended to make things more complex, it's just really, we're trying to simplify things, is that our relationship with our hormones, the messages that we're getting from our hormones, changes over the time of our life. And then I think the next question that you wanted to ask me was, what are the different categories of hormones? So I'll let you ask me that question. I'll stop talking for a second.
That's okay. No, so you talked to me about that there were different classes of hormones, and I hadn't really thought about
Correct.
that before, but I know that there's a lot of different organs in the body, and so then you
Right.
put that together. You had said there were 3 or 4 that were really important, and
Right.
could you address that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say in decreasing order of importance, decreasing order in terms of not necessarily the volume or intensity with which the messages are spoken, but the importance to the
Okay.
human body. Okay. Number one, far and beyond, would be cortisol.
Okay.
So cortisol is our master planner, right? Cortisol, as I've told you before, is
Yep.
king of hormones.
Cortisol is king.
It sits at the head of our court of hormones and basically tells all of our other hormones how to work. Instantly, it's important to realize that if cortisol has the ability to like lord over all of our different hormones, that if we are going to be addressing this hormonal symphony that's in our body, that so many of these viewers who are watching this are interested in, if we are not thinking about cortisol, at least to some degree, we are remiss. Okay, because remember, it's at the top. Another class of hormones that is so important when it comes to the style of healing that we're discussing here is the thyroid hormone. Okay, so I would say if I were to arbitrarily assign like a prioritization, number one would probably be cortisol, right? Number two would be thyroid hormone. And as we know, thyroid hormone is made in the thyroid gland. It's made in response to another hormone. Again, it's a molecule released by the hypothalamus and the pituitary. It travels into our bloodstream. It's called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. It tells our thyroid gland what to do. Our thyroid gland, in response to this hormonal message, makes 2 other hormones. And these are some of these hormones that are based on amino acids, right? So these are T3 and T4, which are based on the amino acid tyrosine. That's where the T comes from. And then these hormones go out and basically go out to all of our cells and say, this is how you want to set your metabolism. Okay. As we're going down in terms of importance, after that, probably the next most important hormone is insulin, right? Cortisol's job at the end of the day is to raise our blood sugar. Insulin's job at the end of the day is to lower our blood sugar. And we need to be thinking about these 2 hormones in almost like a yin yang doppelganger type effect, right? So in a best case scenario, we are never in our body going to have high cortisol and high insulin. Remember, that's made by the pancreas. It's made in response to carbohydrates in our diet. And what it does is it tells our cells to open up certain channels and let glucose come into the cells. So cortisol's job is to get glucose, which is our preferred food of our brain, distributed into our bloodstream to keep us alive. Insulin's job is to say, wait a minute, we just had a big meal. We just settled down and ate a bunch of mangoes, or our tribe killed an elk, or the crops came in. Let's deposit some of that energy into our cells through the hormone insulin. And when all of our cells are filled with enough glucose, we're going to take this extra and we're going to put it into our fat cells, because we want to store some of that away for a rainy day, right? Because the human condition has been typically characterized by more feast and famine than high stress, 24-hour Safeways, 24-hour McDonald's, and Sour Patch Kids. That has not been the human condition on this planet. So going through the sequentially going down, we're talking about different pillars and different tissues that kind of all work in concert. Remember, each of these are creating like a leg of this table. So as we get too much cortisol, everything else starts to tip and fall out of balance for insulin and thyroid. And finally, which is probably why your viewers are tuning into this podcast, our sex hormones. So one thing I want to say, and I think it really, Tina, this bears repeating, and I think there's a take-home message. If you're going to put something at the heading of your podcast saying "Newsflash from Scott Resnick," right? And that is that our sex hormones are wholly dependent on the integrity and the holistic function of cortisol and thyroid and insulin. So remember, we're like walking down this prioritization, right? Because at the end of the day, you cannot live without cortisol. I guarantee you, if the human body does not have cortisol in it, we will not survive. You cannot live without insulin, right? That's a type 1 diabetic. If they don't have insulin, they die, right? You can live for a while without thyroid gland, but you feel like hell, right? Because your metabolism is so downregulated. And then we've got our sex hormones. So if you think that the intent of our sex hormones is to primarily equip the male and female body or to reproduce, then that takes second shrift to surviving and knowing how to dispense out this nutrition that we saved and knowing how to set our metabolism with our thyroid. All that stuff is, subordinate to some of those other sex hormones. And while a woman might wake up in the morning and go, I'm in a horribly estrogen dominant state because I can't get these hormones right, you can't be looking at your hormones without looking at some of these other things.
Thank you. That is so interesting. And I think that our listeners are going to be really surprised, to be honest with you, how much they are all reliant on each other, right? And how
Right.
like you said, I would personally, even though I have some education on this, I would have thought even though I know cortisol is king, I would have thought the sex hormones were higher on the list. So that is really
Yeah, I mean,
interesting to me.
the truth of the matter is that the way I see things is that sex hormones it's like, hey, if we're well fed, if our tribe's not getting attacked, we're in a safe place where we can reproduce and we can have babies. I can assure you that if your tribe is starving and you're going to need to migrate to go find a new water hole, that's not a time to
There's
have
not a
all
lot
of
of
the
babies
women in
being
your tribe
born.
with their arms being full.
Yeah.
But so what's interesting is that when all that stuff is working, that's when we have that estrogen and the testosterone to have our brains saying that, hey, today's a nice day for a roll in the hay with my
Yeah.
partner.
It's time. Yeah.
To make that libido work, to
Yeah.
bring back that sense of horniness and desire and stuff
Yeah.
like that. But when our stress is out the roof because our cortisol is so high, I can guarantee you there are women out there watching this podcast going, oh my God, that's why I never want to make love to my husband when I'm so stressed. All I want to do is sleep. I just want some time by myself. So you could see how your sex hormones, whose job is primarily reproduction, but secondarily, it gives us that nice masculine or feminine, that softness, that libido, that, and again, these hormones have different manifestations in different sexes. So as a man's testosterone is better, his muscles are healthier, his libido is better, his erections are more strong. This has all been studied. Conversely, when a woman's estrogen is well balanced because her stress is intact, her thyroid is working because her insulin's working, that makes it so that the womanly parts are where they're supposed to be, and the libido around the cycle is better, and orgasmic ability is better, and all these different different things. So I think that that's a really important way to look at this is that one, what is a hormone? We discussed this. And I don't know how long we've been talking, but maybe this is like a good bite-sized way to wrap some of this stuff up. As I lose track of time when you and I start talking together, because I'm so impassioned about sharing these things. And I think that we can take a step back when I can remember to speak more slowly and cover some of these things. We begin to take that more panoramic assessment of what's going on with our hormones, because when we have that, then we can make a better plan, develop a better framework to then use our environment, our diet, our supplementation, our mind body practices, all the things that you guys teach in your group to turn around our hormones. But if you just start and say, I'm fixing those hormones, you're missing a lot of opportunities to really get things better. And don't get me wrong, if you have not address those foundational, fundamental, other components of things, if you just start throwing prescriptive or natural hormones into the mix, you think you're going to get things fixed or not?
No.
My experience says not.
No. We've got to pay attention to our energy, right? Our nutrition. We've got to get all those things straightened out. And you also have to do the mental work, the emotional work. You've got to do the spiritual work. It all goes together. And I think that is so important. And I think this is a great place for us to stop, because probably the sex drive, libido, is probably the number 3 question that we get on a regular basis. Why do I not want to have sex with my husband? I love my husband. I love my partner. I don't want to have sex. What is wrong with me? And
so here's what we're going to shoot for. Okay.
There you go.
Is we're going to shoot for all of these same women writing you and saying, this is the great fun sexual stuff that I did. I couldn't believe that I had this in me. I never knew that at age 54 that I could do this. Thank you so much. That's when we know that we're going to be successful, right? When people aren't writing into your group saying, how come I don't want to do this? But they're saying, wait, Tina, I got to tell you that I didn't know that blank was possible. Because I didn't know that I could feel so good. I didn't know that I had it in me. I didn't know that I deserved it. And I think that's a whole nother discussion you and I could have, is that really empowering people to know what is the place of health that you deserve, that you can get to, that you can manifest, that you can create. This is not a dream. Make this reality.
And wink to not be too personal, but I can tell you it works.
Great.
I can tell you it works. So Doc, thank you so much for another great conversation. I think
always.
I know it was really helpful, and I thank you for taking the time. You do a great job for taking things that are really can be very difficult to understand, and you make them easier for us and give us a place to start. We thank you so much, everybody. We can't wait to see you the next time. And
we'll be here.
It'll be a good conversation.
Thank you so much. On.
That's right. Bye, everybody. Thanks, Scott. Have a good night.
All right. See you. Take care.